Father Pine, thank you for meeting me here.
My esteemed pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Kind of wild. I mean, we're in a mutual friend's house.
Yep. Literally holed up in his basement.
Yeah. You're coming back from just doing a talk in Ames. I'm coming back from doing the talk in Omaha, and we just happened to meet in the middle here in Des Moines. But I'm just thankful to meet you. I've seen your work and seen you and your content for a while now, and so it's an honor to get to speak with you. So thank you for taking time to be here.
An honor for me as well. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I do want to get into some stuff with this book, but before I do, I just want to give you a little introduction for people who don't know you. Father Gregory Pine, OP, which, you know, when I hear OP, I'm thinking of the T-shirts back from when I was a kid in the 80s.
Nice.
That's the Order of Preachers. You teach dogmatic and moral theology at the Dominican House of Studies, and you work as an assistant director of the Thomistic Institute.
That's all true.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's all in Washington, D.C., right?
It is indeed. Yeah.
Nice.
What do I think of when I think of OP before I think of Order of Preachers? I think I would probably think of rhymes on the basis of my knowledge of like early 90s rap. So it'd be like, get down with OPP. Yeah, you know. That would be the first thing that I would think of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't going to go there, but I kind of thought that too.
Yeah, nice. Okay. This pleases me.
That's cool. That's cool. Well, you know, I always am fascinated when I talk to priests about how they became a priest.
Yeah, yeah.
So tell us how you grew up. Was faith in a part of your life? Were you always like hardcore Catholic person, or was that something new to you?
I'd say that my family was always hardcore Catholic. I like to give a defense for the boring vocation story, because I think sometimes if you only ever hear sensational vocation stories, sometimes you compare them to your otherwise humdrum life, and you think to yourself, well, I guess God doesn't love me. But like, yeah, my story is pretty boring in the sense that I have two parents who loved me and loved my sisters and brother, and they gave us life and they gave us the faith, and it was always something kind of normal.
Yeah.
And, you know, like you grow up and you think to yourself, this is good. And then you also do things which aren't necessarily the best, or you don't necessarily appropriate the faith as you might. And then God in his infinite mercy and his loving kindness sees fit to pardon you and grow you and direct you strongly and sweetly to wherever it is that he's leading. So like I grew up in a family. My parents took us to Medjugorje on pilgrimage for the first time when I was 3 years old. So that'd be 1991. And then they felt drawn to like start a little Catholic bookshop in town and then lead people to Medjugorje on pilgrimages. I should say apropos Medjugorje, it's like the church gives a kind of approval to those who want to make pilgrimage there, but she doesn't necessarily say that everything that goes on in Medjugorje is necessarily real or borne out by subsequent testimony. So it's like the church has a kind of, let's see how this goes, stance towards Medjugorje, so folks don't have to believe in it, I should say. But it was a big part of my family's life, a big part of my upbringing. I used to joke that we didn't go on vacation, we went on pilgrimage. So yeah, like receiving a kind of formation in the faith was normal. I went to public school all throughout, and I like my mother, I mean, whatever, ethnically speaking, I come from fighting stock, you know, just like Irish and Sicilian, so just like a bunch of people who have been angry at those who occupy their territory for centuries. So like I like going to public school and having defended the faith, and often enough being the only person on this side of the debate as concerns, you know, like abortion or whether we ought to have used the atomic bomb and stuff like that. So it was fun. It got me pumped about life.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up outside of Philadelphia.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
Wow.
So Newtown, Pennsylvania.
I know right where that is. I'm already hearing a couple things that are interesting, like where our stories converge a little bit.
Cool.
Because I met my wife in Philly.
Nice.
And when I met her, I was like a total Jesus freak, Bible, you know, Calvary Chapel guy.
Yep.
And I wanted to date her. And I asked her, I said, are you a Christian? And she says, well, I went to 12 years of Catholic school. Does that count? And I said, no. I said, not a chance. What are you talking about? And because I didn't know anything about Catholicism. I mean, I grew up pastor's kid, right? But
yep.
our pastor in Philly at this big Calvary Chapel megachurch, he's an ex-Catholic. So what I noticed was worked into the fabric of his gospel presentation was this anti-Catholic sort of bias. So
yep.
there were, and as someone who didn't know any better, I just kind of went, okay, well, yeah, we're not here for religion. We're here for relationship and all of the various things. So that was interesting that you grew up out there. And then also I went to Medjugorje. I've been there twice.
That's right.
And the first time I went, I was basically tricked by some Catholics to go there when I was like very. I had made friends with a couple guys who were Catholic, but I was trying to convert them. They were trying to convert me, and they invited me to go on this pilgrimage, and that's where we went.
Yeah.
And
because they said, "Come see the Croatian coast."
They basically said, "Oh, we're going to Rome and Medjugorje. What's Medjugorje? Don't worry about that."
Nice.
They played that off,
Nice.
But when I got there, I was, I knew nothing
Yeah.
about any of the story. I knew nothing about any. I mean, of course, I came to learn about it. It was a pretty powerful experience for me. And then a year after my conversion to Catholicism, my wife and I both went there, which was a completely different experience going as a Catholic.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was pretty wild. So when you say you're from the Philly area, I have some history there. So you're an Eagles fan?
I am an Eagles fan, yeah, and a Sixers fan, and a Flyers fan, and a Phillies fan. So, dyed in the wool, as one says. But you can only be so fanatical when you have other goals in life.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm as fanatical as one can be while still believing in God.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so what did you do after high school? Did you always know that you wanted to go into like religious education? Or?
Nah. I didn't really have many thoughts of the folks, anytime you go to Mass as a single man over the age of 12 and under the age of 1,000, people at church are going to tell you that you're called to the priesthood. So it was the type of thing that I had heard previously, but I wasn't necessarily, super excited at the prospect, nor did I think it was for me. But I went to Franciscan University of Steubenville. My sisters had gone before me. My freshman year, they counseled me not to date. They just said, take the opportunity to make good friends. Because, folks will show up, especially folks who had come from public school, and be like, holy smokes, there are a lot of beautiful Catholic women here. Let's date them all simultaneously. And so they said, just kind of cool the jets, and you'll be fine. So I did, and it wasn't like I was some accomplished dater in high school, but it was the first time that the switch was just dialed to zero. And I went and I heard a lecture about St. Thomas Aquinas that was offered in the student center, and this person spoke about Aquinas on the nature of love, and it kind of blew me away, because to that point I had received a decent formation from my parents, but it was kind of eclectic in the sense I know that this holy person says this, and that wise person says that, and the catechism says thus and such, but I didn't really know how it hung together. And then she was furnishing me with this vocabulary, this grammar to talk about my experience, to narrate what it was that I loved, who it was that I loved, in what order and why. And I was like, this Thomas guy's cool. And so my parents gave me permission to basically take whatever book I wanted from the bookstore, just kind of write it down and call it good. The bookstore closed from maybe reasons not unrelated. And so I picked up this book about St. Thomas Aquinas. I don't know if you've ever read any of these Louis de Waal little lives of saints.
No.
Super charming. He wrote them in the 50s, 60s, I want to say. And the one about St. Thomas Aquinas, it's mostly about his sister and her, love interest and blah, blah, blah. But there's a lot of Thomas woven in, and it communicates, the depth of his sanctity with this real, beautiful conviction. And I just found myself saying, I want to love the Lord like that. Because I'd had, various desires previously. I wanted to do something big and bold and beautiful for the Lord. I want it to be, devout. I want it to be consecrated. I want it to be undivided. I want it to have something to do with love. I don't know in what way. But then in his witness, it kind of, I'd love that. I'd love to love the Lord like that. And so, I had to finish school. And so I graduated. I entered the order. You go through initial formation. I've been a priest for 10 years and done different things, but yeah. When
you were going to Franciscan, did you if you're going to go into? Did you just get a general degree, a bachelor's degree in theology, or or is there a more specialized thing for Thomism or something like that?
Yeah, that'd be awesome. So there are folks who go there with the understanding that they're gonna pursue priestly formation, and so they'll probably study philosophy mostly, maybe some history, languages, intro theology. I came to the decision after my freshman year. And I was already studying math and then this liberal arts program called Humanities and Catholic Culture. And for my particular province of the Dominicans, it doesn't matter what you studied. You could study philosophy, but you could also study underwater basket weaving. And so I just kept on keeping on with math and humanities and Catholic culture. And delighted to study things in which I was interested, and then delighted to pick up with philosophy and theology in subsequent years.
Nice.
Yeah.
So where did you go to seminary?
So we have our own house of formation in Washington, D.C. It's called the Dominican House of Studies.
Nice.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I was there from 2011 to I was ordained in 2016.
Yeah. Wow. So you became a priest, but you're not a parish priest, right?
No.
You're part of this order.
Exactly.
what's the discernment to that versus like going into like a diocesan parish life? I mean, is that like a secondary level of discernment, or how does one decide they want to go into an order versus diocesan life?
My suspicion is that it depends on the man. But my experience was that it was St. Thomas Aquinas, and on account of the fact that St. Thomas Aquinas was a Dominican priest, that was all I really needed to know. So I didn't really think about becoming a diocesan priest. I met with the vocation director, who was very kind and solicitous and understanding, just to kind of say, hey, I'm thinking about becoming a Dominican priest. But apart from that, I was just kind of, I was sold. So I suspect, though, that there are other men who feel drawn to the priesthood and then suspect that there's something else. And the basic distinction is like, okay, so a priestly life is a life of generosity, of liberality, in the sense that his is a life poured out. So a priest is very much for his people. In religious life, the notion of the consecration is more so he is exclusively the Lord's. So there is a kind of tension in the religious life, especially with the religious priesthood, but I don't actually think it's a real tension. I think it's just a perceived tension of whether you're going to the Lord or going to the people. I think, though, that the best way to go to the people is to go to the Lord, if that makes sense. You enrich them with the many gifts which our Lord desires to bestow in generous abundance, and it's just a matter of kind of channeling those gifts or stewarding those gifts. So, like the Dominican life, for instance, it's a kind of contemplative life. We refer to it as an apostolic life. Strictly speaking, it's an active life, and then it has this active apostolate, but it's one that's consecrated to a life of contemplation, and then that contemplation kind of brims over the bounds of the Dominican man's heart, or the man's Dominican heart, such that it overflows or spills into the lives of those whom he serves. So I think it's going to depend on the man. And if he's discerning diocesan priesthood, that's a priest for a place, for a people. If he's discerning religious life, that's a consecration for God of a spousal nature, and he might discern that those two things come together.
Do people, like religious life people, do they ever make the transition?
Yep.
And
sometimes people will seek what's called, exclaustration, in that they'll be dispensed from their religious vows, and they'll incarnate in a diocese. And then sometimes diocesan priests, they might be in their diocese for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and they'll think to themselves, this isn't just, it's not going away. This desire for religious life isn't going away. And so then their bishop typically affords them time and space to inquire, and then they might, enter postulancy, novitiate with a particular religious congregation.
So in your work at the Thomistic Institute, are you teaching people? So are you teaching like other religious, like younger guys who want to be monks or priests or whatever?
Exactly. So it's a house of formation for my province of the Dominican order, and so most of the men that I have in class are Dominican friars who have made their first profession and are taking steps towards their final profession and then priestly ordination. But then it's a graduate school of theology, so there are also other religious, other seminarians, other lay students. So I'll have those folks in my class as well.
Do you like to teach? Is that like your jam?
Yeah, my jam is to preach, truth be told. But I like to teach. I love to preach. And my understanding is that the gospel's fire, and fire gives light, and it gives heat. And I think there's a certain warmth and affection, which is characteristic of preaching. Like, you don't really have to argue when you preach. You just kind of assert, but you assert on the basis of a relationship in which you invite another person, or into which you invite another person. Whereas with with teaching, you typically have to be more patient, persevering in the exposition, give people steps, make the arguments. And I don't love that as much, but I definitely see the place for it in evangelical discourse, because I think it's super important that people know that the church has chops, that she has reasons for what she believes, and that's attractive, that it's coherent, that it all hangs together.
So in your role, where do you get to preach?
So I get to preach. And with the Thomistic Institute, I'll often be on college campuses giving talks.
Yeah.
And you can do that in any number of ways. I tend to do it more as preaching than as teaching. So I have to catch myself typically 32 minutes in because I'm shouting. It's like, ooh, sorry guys, just getting out ahead of myself there. And then I have a podcast. I contribute to a handful of different podcasts, but the one to which I dedicate most time is called Godsplaining. And for us, it's like the podcast should always lead people to a Christian community.
Yeah.
And so we host a lot of retreats and one-day events so that people can come together and form those connections. And then I'll also do various and sundries, so in the sense that I kind of set for myself an upper bound for travel, so 100 days out of the house. And the things to which I'm assigned usually take up about 65, 70 of those days. But then that leaves you with another 30, 35 to determine how you might apportion. So we'll do things that seem important or things that seem fitting or things that seem funky and fun.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Tell us about one of those funky and fun things. Is that...
Well, I think it's like the fact of our relationships aren't incidental. You know, they're not accidental. They signify something. And I think the people with whom you spend your life have a kind of claim on you. Not that they're going to like control you and manipulate you, but it's not an accident that I was born in the city of Philadelphia. So I think that if like the Office of Youth and Young Adults of the city of Philadelphia says, hey, could you speak at this event? That it has a kind of claim on me.
Yeah.
Because that's part of me. That's part of who I am. That's my mission. That's my identity. And so I try, you know, because like if you end up only taking those things which are, you know, judged, you know, like I'm only going to go to an event with at least 3,500 people. Well, I'm never going to do that. So, but in the sense that like it just becomes weird, you know, the criteria becomes weird and kind of robotic rather than human. So I think it's good just to recognize, yeah, the fun, funky nature of human life, and then to portion your time in meaningful fashion. So like I'll get requests from friends from college to do like random talks here, there, everywhere. And I can't typically do all of them, but I try to do one or two of them each year. So I'm like going to Jersey. The Mid-Atlantic has a very similar character, but Jersey's got a special verve. A lot of people hate on Jersey, which is stupid because Jersey's sweet.
I was born in Jersey, man.
Let's go, baby.
Yeah.
Where exactly?
Belleville, which is just right outside of Jersey City.
Nice. That's awesome. That cultural mecca of the East, Jersey City, baby. So yeah, whether you're in Jersey City or Bayonne or Hoboken, you know, it's like, it doesn't matter provided that there's a real connection or an organic connection. So I'm going to give some talks in the Diocese of Metuchen and then maybe Patterson, whatever. We're going to bop around a little bit and try to apportion it in a way that's cool. So yes, I think it's just like good to have those things in mind because, yeah, sometimes the way that your relationship with the Lord unfolds, it means being present to like this room of 8th grade students who are like more pumped about viral memes than they are about the Lord Jesus. But if you could just a little bit, then that would be significant for them. So yeah.
Yeah, I was a youth pastor for a lot of years, and when I get asked to go give talks in schools now, honestly, nothing is more horrifying to me. Because I'm like, all right, I know they're a captive audience, but not by their own free will typically. So yeah. But if you can find those moments when you can connect with a student in a talk,
yeah, and
they sort of that glazed look, and they sort of, wow, okay, that was a little bit interesting.
Yeah, there's
nothing better than that.
Yep.
You know, it's super cool. Okay, so you wrote this book called Taming the Tongue, and I the reason why I really liked it, well, first of all, it's very well written, I should say. I read a lot of Catholic books because of all the stuff, but this was different to me because it wasn't just like about some sort of ethereal theology. It was about something that everybody deals with, which is their stinking mouths, you know? And I don't know. I related a lot to what you said. There were a couple stories in there, one in particular where you were talking about this other brother and he just happened to be walking around the corner and you're like, oh, we've all said things that we wish we could take back.
Yep.
And what I've noticed in my life is the older I get, and people are going to laugh at this, but especially if they spend time with me, the older I get, the less I talk.
Yeah.
And when I think back to my younger days, there's so many times I wish, why didn't I just shut up? You know, why did I say that or whatever? So I'm curious. I want to ask you some practical questions about that too. But what do you think the biggest mistake people make is that causes them later to go, oh, why did I say that?
Yeah. I think short answer is I don't know. But maybe to start with gossip. So I think that what we want is communion. Like what we want is to come together. We want to know that we have a place. We want to know that we play a part. And often enough, we feel dissatisfied, you know, like alienated or isolated. We feel like we're on the outside looking in. And so when we can't get genuine communion, we'll settle for fell communion in the sense that, like, if we can't talk about edifying subjects of mutual interest with people who are delightful, well, then we'll just talk about other people with whomever we can lay hold of. And so I think like maybe the simple encouragement to most folks is to say, yeah, the Lord's got a plan for your life. That plan is good. And he's got people with whom he wants you to share your life. And those people are good. And at present, you might feel lonely, sad, anxious, whatever. But like, you're not going to spend your whole life on the outside looking in. You've got a place. you play a part, and you can trust that, but often enough it might just take time. So I think a lot of us, we prove impatient or we lack perseverance in our approach to life, and that can make us, quick to grasp at that fell communion, which is but a pale shadow of the genuine communion to which we're called.
I think that what people have learned, especially with social media, is that the quickest way to unite a group of people is to start talking crap about somebody, and to be negative.
Yeah.
And I think in life today in the faith, there's this weird tension, and you have kind of a chapter about this about correction, and I want to get into some of the practicals about this. There's this weird tension of, well, I see this thing that may be wrong. Either it's an objective thing that's happening or it's something that a person is doing. Therefore, I must speak about it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that you talk about in this chapter, I'm just going to open it up, is you talk about these 3 different criterias for whether you should offer correction to somebody. Because, spoiler alert, we don't always have to open our mouths when we see something we disagree with.
Yeah.
So let's walk through these real quick, if you don't mind. The first one is this a serious fault? Is this a serious fault? How do you think we can know if we see someone that what they're doing or saying is serious enough for us to actually say something?
Yeah, I think part of that means to have a sense of scope or to have a sense of context. So we get however many years to live our lives. We shouldn't be dilatory in converting. We shouldn't tarry along the way and say to ourselves, I've got time, no big deal. There should be a certain urgency to our Christian conversion, but there also has to be a recognition that you can only expect of a 7-year-old the perfection proper to a 7-year-old, and you can only expect of a 25-year-old the perfection proper to a 25-year-old, etc. And so sometimes, we want to correct people in ways that may actually prove harmful, given the fact that it's overly severe given where they are in life. And so, people, 7-year-olds are going to fall into 7-year-old sins, and 25-year-olds are going to fall into 25-year-old sins. And I think there should be a certain measure of tolerance for that, and recognition that, this guy, So, for instance, let's say that I'm talking to a young man, and he's pumped about life, and he also wants to impress me with his theological acumen. And so the conversation ends up that he talks 75% of the time, and he blathers on a bit, and maybe he throws in a lot of imprecision and whatever else it is. There might be certain imperfections to the conversation. I could correct him in that moment, but I think it's probably more important that I encourage him in that moment, because I think there's a sense in which there's a lot of good there. There's a lot of desire there. He's a 19-year-old who cares about the faith. That's a lot. Not to say that we should just content ourselves with baseline things, but that's a lot. Whereas if I encourage him, I can encourage him in a good direction without being controlling or manipulating, but just simply saying hey, the sensitivity that you showed to that particular point was great. In the background, it might be that he didn't show sensitivity to other points, but I don't need to say that. Just kind of direct its attention to the good and let the good do its work on him. I think that's a lot of it can be, situated in that way.
I think that's very important, because what you're talking about there is this recognition of the person that you're in relationship with, because you started off talking about we all want community.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think that we view our speech as it's sort of like we put ourselves out as a walking billboard of what is based in right, and we want everyone to know that we have the right opinions, that we have the right views on everything. And meanwhile, that message may or may not be getting through to anybody, because they might be distracted by something that we said, or maybe in that particular interaction was inappropriate. And when you're talking about understanding, because I can relate to the guy who's just, I want to tell you all this stuff, and you don't want to be the actually guy, because that's not really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's about what is serious. Is this serious? It's almost kind of is this really helpful? Do I need to correct this guy in this moment?
Yeah, and I think too, a lot of life is messy, and that's not to say that you have to compromise yourself morally in order to enter into life with other people. But I do think you're right. A lot of online discourse, it's motivated by a certain measure of virtue signaling. You want to indicate to your audience, you want to indicate to your followers that you are of this tribe or of this nation, as a way by which to reassure them of your integrity or of your whatever, But like a lot of, I mean, not to say that we should traffic in ambiguity and that we should straddle lines that ought not be straddled, but I also think that like the point of human life is to share it with each other. And I think as Catholics, we need to be willing to share our lives with practically everybody on account of the fact that everybody is potentially at least a member of the mystical body. So it's like God desires that all be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. And there's a content to that all, in the sense that like the Lord wants us to be all things to all men without becoming spineless or without becoming empty, but trying genuinely to be accommodating. So I think sometimes when we set up our positions in easily recognizable forms, it's just for the assurance that this is righteousness or this is whatever it is, I think I'm being a little bit ambiguous at this point, but I think it's like, for instance, I don't talk a lot about politics. One, because I don't really know. I think it's just complicated, and I think you need to be really into it in order to appreciate it in its complexity. And I just don't think that it's the best way in which to meet people. I don't think that's the best way in which to facilitate conversation of a genuinely evangelical sort, because it's super polarized at present. So yeah, I just think like I want to be able to muck it up with most folks. And I don't want to marshal my speech in such a way that I say effectively, if you're of this type or of this sort, then you need not apply.
It's hard to avoid those traps sometimes, though, because people are always trying to size you up.
Yeah.
They're looking for the code words, the coded language, the indicators that you're either with them or you're against them.
Yeah.
And there's very little gray area anymore, it seems like. Yeah. Even in the church, it's kind of, are you one of them or are you one of us?
Yep.
So I was really kind of bristling when you were talking about that whole virtue signal thing, because that's something I still struggle with, I find, and it's really sort of humiliating to me to realize that, because you want to get to a point where you go, I don't care about that.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that's one of the things that you talk about in this book is that, we do these things because deep down inside, we want people to like us.
Yeah, yeah.
And we want people to respect us. And sometimes, though, our desire to do that, and we see this all the time, people have that desire, like the guy you were talking about. He just wants your approval. He just wants you to remember him.
Yep.
And so what do we do when we get nervous? Some people clam up. Some people, do this.
Yep.
But there's so much pressure put on us sometimes to do that virtue signal, to say, hey, just so you know, I'm this, I'm that.
Yeah.
But is that in and of itself a serious enough thing to correct somebody over?
Yeah.
That's I think that's an interesting criteria to say. Just because you notice someone saying something that might not be 100% accurate or whatever, does not necessarily mean you have to correct them.
Yeah.
Because maybe it's not even, maybe they didn't ask you to.
Yeah.
I
think it's like maybe we draw a distinction between, idiosyncrasy and sin. Like this person might just be a little strange, or this person might just be like a little weird. And, some of that might merit correction of a gentle sort. But for the most part, we're looking for sin. And then sin that's getting worked out in the course of life, and sin which might require help in order to address. And I think we're really looking for the lattermost. We're really looking for those sins which might require help in order to address, because it's evident in certain cases this person's stuck. This person just doesn't see it and can't see it from his present vantage.
Yeah.
And part of the resources that he needs in order to see it are the resources that I can furnish. Not because I'm better than him, but because God has put us in a mystical body with organic relationships such that we can be a benefit to each other. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to the second one here. And the second one is, can this person change? Can they change?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's obviously the goal. But if you know that they can't, and that could be for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
Maybe the reason is you're never going to see him again. You sit next to him on a plane and, maybe they can't change, but not because of anything you're going to do, plant a seed or something. But how do you determine that?
Yeah, it's kind of guesswork, but I think the basic idea is this means a sensitivity to the person's current situation. So, like, some people are totally overwhelmed. There's a sense in which, like, sadness, for instance, can really gunk up our humanity and make it really hard for us to do difficult things. So it's like, let's say this guy just lost his mom. She passed away 2 months ago. And you think that he ought to be done mourning at this point because you need him to snap out of it because you're doing this thing together at work. Fact is, the matter is, like, only he can mourn her, and you can't. And that might require more patience than you have at present, but I don't know that the move is necessarily to correct him. I think the move might be to say, all right, man, this is clearly tough. That we're here for you, and we got the resources for you, but we also need to move forward on this project. do you want to move forward with it, or do you want to step back from it so we can get somebody else on the team to move forward? So like, it doesn't mean infinite compassion of a kind of, whatever, flowy sort, but it does mean clear communication of love, and then, all right, we're going to take our next steps in whichever direction. Or it might be a determination, for instance, of like, if I were to correct this person at this juncture, it actually might make it worse. So there are certain people here who are just like really stubborn, really obstinate, really obdurate, really intransigent. And when you push on them, they push back really hard. And it can actually worsen the situation. So in those instances, I find that rather than direct confrontation, what you can do is, how can I help? I don't know if you ever read the Wing Feather Saga, children's books, but it's written by this guy, Andrew Peterson, who'd be awesome to talk to. He's Anglican. He's a recording artist, and he writes books. But there's a situation in which it recounts these 3 little kids' lives as they escape peril and blah, blah, blah. But the sweet little girl, she's the youngest of the family, so there's 2 boys and a little girl. She recognizes that one of her brothers is really angry, and he's about to lash out at the next person who says something to him. Like, he's in one of those moods. And she just asks him, like, is there anything that I can do? And that just totally diffuses his anger, because he realizes in the moment that it's irrational. He can realize that it's irrational, but he can't deal. Like, we've all been there when you're drafting an email of an angry sort and you're realizing this is not a good email to send, but I don't have a good one to send right now. So what I need to do is not write this email. And so, like, we can help each other with that perspective-wise. And so I think that, is this the right time for the situation? If we find ourselves always retreating from correction and never delivering correction, then we're probably a little bit nervous. We're probably maybe even a little bit cowardly. And it's good to know that, so we probably have to venture forth with more frequency. But I think for the most part, we should lead love. We should lead tenderness, we should lead kindness and see what we can do. And I think that probably helps most folks. And it's, probably more rarely that we have to say, hey, I see this thing, you see this, we see this thing. What can we do, and can I help? That type of thing.
Yeah, that's important. Can they change? I mean, that's always the hope. But at some point in time, there has to be a desire to change.
Yep.
And sometimes there has to be that permission given.
Yep.
And I don't know, I've got a few people in my life that we have this understanding where it's, hey, if you see me doing something that is inconsistent with who I'm trying to be, then I'm asking you to call me out.
Yep.
I think those relationships are helpful. But what's sometimes not helpful is when strangers do it that don't know us, or they have some other agenda, which I guess goes into your third point, which is this rooted in love?
Yeah.
Which I think is probably the trickiest one.
Yep.
Because we're sinful human beings that are always, self-motivated by something, and what is this going to bring to us? But I find that can sometimes work against us, because we might just say, it's not worth it. I don't want to fight this person. I don't want to get into this situation because I don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, so, I mean, there are certain situations that we have to deal with, especially those situations which are governed by justice. So if you're like a workplace superior and an inferior is creating a hostile work culture, like this person is actively disengaged and is disedifying the rest of the office, you have to correct that person. You have to correct that person in justice. Nevertheless, like charity is still at work in the correction, because charity commends the correction to the individual and makes it easier for the individual to digest, to receive. But there are other situations where there isn't that type of thing, and so it's really only going to be the love which sweetens the difficulty for the person who has to endure it. Because a confrontation with our own imperfection is always hard.
Yeah.
Like, you said you've written you've written a book or 2 or however many. When you submit your writing to an editor, what you want to hear back is, gosh, this is the best darn thing that's ever been written in the whole wide world. If I could give you a prize yesterday, I would do it, but I can only give you a prize today. But what we typically get back is like, this is trash, try again.
Yeah.
And when you turn it in, you're like, this is the best thing that's ever been written. When you get it back and you see it from that vantage, you're like, yeah, that's true. This is trash. The whole introduction, the whole frame narrative, the whole whatever, it can be improved upon. But like, as you get writing back from editors time and time again, it gets sweeter, and you almost get hungry for the edits, because you recognize in turning your writing over that it isn't that good. But if it's going to get better, you're going to need help. You're going to need good editors. And so I think that when we can consistently communicate to another that I only bring this stuff up when it's called for and with love in a way that helps you to address it, then I think that it actually gets easier. Like it gets to be something that we actually crave. That's ideal. But
yeah. We used to pay. So when I left ministry to become Catholic, my wife and I, we had a photography studio. We had a photography business.
Nice.
And we used to pay a lot of money for people to tell us how bad we sucked. Like we would find these awesome photographers that we looked up to and pay them to critique us.
Nice.
Because you get to a point where, and I've seen so many parallels in the spiritual life with this, you get to this point where you go, this is the art I've created or the work I've created. This is the best I can do. In my view, this is the pinnacle.
Yep.
And then you bring somebody else whose work you respect greatly, and they sit down. I remember one time we had this guy, we brought him up, and he said, pick your 10 best images. And so I'm like, all right, he's going to be like, whoa, we're done here. I have nothing more to teach you. And the first one goes on the screen, and we're in a room with a few of our other photographer friends that we all chipped in to get this guy to come up. And in like 0.8 nanoseconds, he's like, okay, this. And I was shocked, but I agreed with him.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow. But the thing that was the most important, and I think this goes right hand in hand with this, is what we asked him specifically and what he did for us was, where am I seeing you making the same mistakes consistently?
Yeah.
Where's the problem not in the execution? Because nobody's perfect. We're never going to execute perfectly in the spiritual life. But where is the problem in your thinking?
Yep.
Where's the problem in the way that your brain is driving your sense of spirituality? Where do you keep making the same mistake? Because what does that ultimately mean? Where do you believe a lie? I believe a lie in a photograph that if I crop it back at this angle, it's going to be the best. But he's constantly always zooming in on everything, and he's cropping it in this way. I'm believing that it needs to be this way. That stuff is so helpful, which is one of the things I've just come to love about being Catholic is this direction that we can receive from each other that isn't rooted in, well, just try harder.
Yeah.
It's to seek that deep conversion that happens. But I think when you talk about this, a lot of it has to do with how do you help other people achieve that in a way that is going to be helpful. And if it's not rooted in love, like you said here, then you've already lost the fight.
I think honestly, like that's my understanding of what preaching and teaching is for.
Yeah.
It's to give folks a renewed gaze on God, so that in gazing on God in new fashion, they can love Him with greater ardor and avidity. It's like, there aren't many mountains here in Iowa, but you go to a place like North Carolina or to a place like Colorado, and you've got lots of big, beautiful mountains. But at midday, on a clear day, they're kind of overexposed. You lose a sense for their subtlety and nuance. But in the magic hour, that last hour of daylight, you see these rich hues, you see these colors which previously didn't present themselves, and it's almost as if the mountains were intended to be seen in this light. And it's like that gives you a new appreciation for their beauty, for their grandeur, for their excellence. And I think that like a lot of what preaching and teaching should be is casting that light on things spiritual, kind of like setting people's lives within the magic hour of God's love and mercy so that they can appreciate how really big, bold, beautiful, glorious, majestic His offer of love and mercy is in fact, and then their hearts follow in turn. Because like you said, you can't just keep telling people to try harder because everyone breaks.
Yeah.
Everybody, it's like we can't, we just can't.
All right, so this is sort of a selfish question. What is, in your opinion, like 2 or 3 things that make a talk really great? When you hear somebody give a talk that you're just like, man, that was awesome.
Yeah.
Have you found consistent things that you look for or that you seem that those great talks have in common?
So here's some random thoughts. First is, I think that it's good to have a frame narrative. I think you should start and end at the same place because it affords people like memorative techniques to take away with them what you want them to leave with. So some talks, with young people, I tend to care less about... AKA a point. A point, yeah. Exactly. I tend to care less about internal organization because I find that young brains are often kind of... They're wired differently, and they're wired a lot more chaotically. And so you can work in the chaos because a lot of the times they're just looking for quotes to pull out. They're just looking for kind of anecdotes more so than structure. But if there's folks of at least my generation in the audience, then I'll try to discipline my points, typically to 3. And I make it so that those 3 points, they are like related. So it's not like elephants, the Allegheny River, and like oral hygiene. It's like, what do those have to, so like they'll all start with the same letter or they'll all rhyme or something like that. Okay, but talking about people whom I've heard preach, whom I think do the best. So for me, I really value the preaching of a contemplative, the preaching of somebody who has looked at life and who has considered it, like who has weighed it in conversation with the Lord. That's something that you can't fake. It's clear when somebody has really suffered life well and then communicated to you something of that experience. The next thing is, I love it when somebody uses his or her personality in a way that's unaffected. Like when you get the impression that that person is free, when the person isn't like operating by a kind of interior logic, the nature of which you can't quite comprehend, but when you see that person kind of mobilized as God wants that person to be mobilized, like it doesn't necessarily assume the same shape. But for persons, for instance, who are like good with words, just let them course over your tongue. Or for persons who are better at crafting phrases, write it out. I'm completely content to hear you read a bit. And then I'd say like maybe the next thing is, I love it when people tell stories in which they are present, but from which they kind of disappear. There's different ways to tell stories, but I think that whenever you tell a story in which you're the hero, you're at grave risk. So, and I don't think that the thing to do is to tell a story in which you're the villain. There's some stories in there in which I appear somewhat silly, but I like insofar as I could, you try to retreat from the spotlight because at the end of the day, like we don't really matter and no one really cares. Without being too deflationary or sounding kind of nihilistic, it's never been about us. It's always been about the Lord. And so I think if you can tell a story in which you appear, but from which you kind of also disappear, as a way by which to illuminate a point and specifically to spotlight the Lord, I think that takes real skill. But people who do it well, that's awesome. Those are some thoughts.
Can you think of like the best talk you've ever heard?
Best talk I've ever heard. I've heard, let's see. I can think of a couple of homilies that I've heard, which really, really profoundly changed my life. One by a priest. His name is Father Nicholas Ingham. He's in his 70s. He taught philosophy at Providence College for 40 years. But he always had a way. So basically, like he gave up. He preached a homily about basically putting forward our Lord Jesus Christ and the temptation to egotism. Basically, like, you can say, I put forward Jesus Christ, but the question is whether you have said, I put forward Jesus Christ, or I put forward Jesus Christ. And it was something about the subtlety with which he gave a kind of psychological and emotional read on our own mixed motivations and impure intentions, and then a kind of metaphysical read on what it means to set the Lord forth, and like this just kind of hopeful rendering of how the Lord has begun the work of that transformation, and basically all we need to do is show up for it. I found that that was beautiful. How about you?
Yeah, I remember there's two that come to mind. One before I was Catholic,
and
one since I was Catholic. The Catholic one was our parish priest, Father Aaron Junge, who's a young guy. He's probably about your age, maybe a little bit younger than you. And it was his Easter homily that knocked my socks off. I had the first year that he preached. And, when you go to Easter, you kind of expect to hear the same stuff.
Yeah.
He blew me away with his understanding of the glory of Christ in Easter, connecting it to our glory. I mean, he did kind of like a C.S. Lewis, weight of glory kind of thing. Yeah. And it was amazing. And I remember thinking, he's so young and he just knocked it out of the park.
Yeah.
The other one was a guy named Louis Giglio, who is like one of these megachurch pastors. I heard him at a youth conference in Saddleback, California at Rick Warren's church. And Louis is the best preacher I've ever heard, hands down. He's just incredible. And he gave this incredible talk about how our prayer life is so rooted in God protect me and keep me safe, and how that's the antithesis of the gospel. That to follow Christ means that you can't, from a worldly perspective, always be so concerned about your own personal protection.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously there was a lot more to it than that, but I remember listening to that going, how do you get better than that? And it was almost kind of like when I go see like a really good drummer at a show or whatever, I just want to throw my sticks down and never touch them again. After I heard Louis preach, I thought, what am I doing? I need to like be a janitor or something. Maybe I'll become Catholic. I don't know. But no, it was really cool. But I love, the thing that's really been cool about being Catholic is watching priests work in that homily space versus like the sermon space, because they're two completely different things.
They are.
You go to a Protestant church, the sermon is the show.
Yep.
That's everything. So the preacher or pastor, he spent probably 10, 12 hours just on that thing. I don't know any priest that gets to spend that kind of time on a homily.
No.
But I've seen some incredible homilies given in that relatively short window of time by priests who are just from their overflow of their life and of the readings. But in my opinion, and this is just me, the best homilies are the ones that just simply explain the readings and apply them.
Sure.
So to me, that's kind of where I go with that.
Yeah.
Because I'm a Bible guy. I like biblical exegesis. I still love all the stuff that I was before I was Catholic in that idea.
Yep.
I love that. So I'm getting into like some more of the contemplative stuff where that kind of fascinates me a little bit. So I don't know. I would love to hear some of those types of messages that you're talking about from these contemplative guys too. But I want to come back to this for a second because I want to ask a question. I have a friend who used to always challenge me and others with this notion. He would say, when you leave a gathering of people, are they better off that you had been there?
Yep.
Or are they worse off? And he was talking about that from the standpoint of what do we bring to the table from what we're saying?
Yep.
What do you think people need to think about in terms of things they should say or not say when they just enter into a gathering of people?
Yeah. No, I think maybe the first thing to say is that we should have things to say, and not in the sense of like the skill or technique of having things to say, but in the sense that we should have rich stores laid up in our interior life about which we're thinking and, with which we're willing to engage in the company of friends and family and others besides. Because I think that like a lot of what's at stake in the emptiness or vanity of our conversations is the emptiness or vanity of our interior lives. Like a lot of us, a lot of folks here, 21st century, this is not to assign fault or blame, but a lot of folks spend a lot of time watching television or, like scrolling through whatever app or just kind of like puttering around the internet. But we don't know, we just don't have a lot of substantive content in our life in the sense that we haven't dedicated the time to prayer, to study, to relationships, which have promised to enrich us. And as a result of which, when we come before the other, it's fine to be taciturn, it's fine to be shy, but we don't necessarily have a lot of things to say. And so we'll often settle for crass things or silly things or dumb things or whatever else. And so I think it's like, if you're going to have a good conversation, that you have to have, one, a genuine interest in the world, two, a genuine interest in the other. So it kind of presumes that you're together along the way in a sort of verbal adventure, and that it's got like something of the thrill of discovery to it, because this person's been thinking about things, and I've been thinking about things, and neither of us are here to like show off. Neither of us are here to like demonstrate our competence. We're just here to encounter each other and to encounter the world together. And I think that sets you up well. Like I really enjoy those conversations. And so I think that what is of primary importance is that we're spending time in the chapel, that we're reading good books, that we're kind of processing our experiences in the setting of our homes. And so that when we come to a conversation, there are things of potentially mutual interest that are already there, like they're already at work.
So you have something to say.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, a good friend of mine who was he was a contractor, and I helped him out for a few weeks once. And whenever something would break, I would be like, I'd have a meltdown, and he was just super chill. And I remember saying to him one day, I'm like, why don't you freak out? And he spent a lot of time in the chapel. He was a very solid Catholic guy. And I remember one day he said to me, Keith, whatever you're full of spills out when you're bumped. And it made me just reflect on that of why is everything that's spilling out of me anxiety or frustration or whatever, because at that time in my life, that's what I was dealing with, But for him, he had such a peace about him because he was so grounded in the Lord and in the sacraments that whenever something happened, he just had this built-in sense of calm and peace. And I think that if we work on ourselves, like what you're saying, to the point where we have that peace, we have that calm, and we care about the world and we care about the other person, when we come into conversations, we don't have to just settle for the small talk or the negativity or the complaining that seems to be so prevalent.
Yeah. No, I think it's like, again, a lot of times with gossip, it's, maybe it's that we've been hurt by somebody and we want to talk about them so that we can hurt them back and kind of settle the score. But a lot of times it's just like we just don't have a lot of things to say, and we'll just indulge in gossip out of a spirit of idleness. Or it might be that we're just trafficking in the currency of other people's lives, because that's the currency that's required to gain admission to whatever group we actually desire entry into.
Yeah.
And so, it's like we're not often reflective on the reasons for which we do the things that we do, but when we go back, to our room at night and make a little examination of conscience, it's often a recognition like, ooh, there's a little pride there, there's a little vanity there. Which is uncomfortable to recognize, but it also shouldn't be surprising, insofar as we're fallen and we're on the way, and it shouldn't be occasion for like auto-accusation so much as should be occasion for like, ooh, Lord, do I actually delight in your company? Do I actually delight in your conversation? Am I willing to kind of steward that conversation with others or in the company of others? So good things to reflect on.
Yeah. Just another kind of tactical question for you.
Yeah.
You travel around, you're clearly a religious. When you are in situations with strangers, are you looking for conversation starters, or do you sort of let that come to you?
I typically let it come to me. That in part is just temperament. I'd say I'm more kind of introverted, shy, retiring. So my big thing, I like smiling at people without being creepy. Like a lot of folks at this stage of the game just have AirPods in, as they're passing to and fro. And so there isn't the same kind of opportunities for conversational engagement as there might have been like 30 years ago, but they still exist, especially like in places of business or places of travel, like airports and train stations and stuff like that. And I find that, warm smiles do a lot, not as like an affectation, but I think that, by and large, provided that I've got a little bit of sleep the night before and I've had a double shot of espresso, I find life to be, pretty fun.
Do you have like a sort of a go-to? Like, let's say you sit on an airplane and someone sits next to you and you get the sense that there's a warmth there too. Yeah. What's your go-to as far as like opening question to somebody?
So I typically don't. So when I go to the airport, I pray for two things. I pray to see like other religious, because it just helps in the sense of belief, hope.
They just fist bump walking by.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like, let's go.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I pray for is good conversations. I'm probably not as open to those conversations as I ought to be, just because I'm often getting stuff done. Like when I'm traveling, I usually have a variety of tasks back at home that keep on keeping on, irrespective of whether or not I'm at my desk. But in those conversations, it's usually other people who begin them, and people begin them in benign enough ways, but it's clear that they have other things to talk about. Yeah. So just to kind of like welcome that. I think there's a way of being encouraging in conversation, and then there's a way of being discouraging in conversation. And I think that it's good, it's good to be, there are times where you're going to have to get something done. You're going to have to shut a conversation down. You do that gently, or you do that genteelly. But I think there are ways in which to be encouraging in conversation. And my thought is like, in the 21st century, people are kind of in the habit of being a little bit aggressive, has been my experience, because internet culture is aggressive, and internet culture has become our primary referent for how to relate to people.
Yeah.
So like the comm box is a disastrous place, and we've just gotten used to being, so like, people might start a conversation with, I don't want to like necessarily say anything concrete, because the ones that I have in my mind are distinct from just the last couple of weeks, and I don't want to out those folks if they listen to the podcast, but they'll say something about the Catholic Church. It's kind of like, whoa. And what I just like the first one, I'll just take in stride and just say like, oh, good to meet you. Like just kind of pretend to not comprehend wholly the brunt of the issue, because my experience is that right behind that crass opening salvo, there is a desire to commune, because they wouldn't have started the conversation if there weren't. And then you'll soon find, like I'm in an ongoing email exchange with a guy right now. The first thing that he said to me was, how do I contact the church about reparations? Because like his great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather had been a Protestant reformer who had been killed, who had been like burned basically. And I was like, interesting questions.
So he wants to refund the cost of the wood? Is that what he's trying to do?
Exacto. Yeah, no, so like he wanted to talk about but we've just been like trading emails back and forth.
Yeah.
He just sent me a book, and he seems like a kind man who genuinely wants to be good. And it's not clear that his questions lie in the line of Catholicism, but I think it's basically I'm a priest, so I'm ordained for him.
Yeah.
I'm ordained for the whole world. So a lot of times people will ask of you more than you can give, and I think it's in the way that you respond, you show the character of the man. And what I like to tell people in a lot of situations is like, for instance, like I don't typically do spiritual direction, but I'm a priest. I was ordained for you. So if you ever have questions, send them along. We can schedule a phone call. We can chat them through, whatever it is. But I think that like at the end of the day, the answer is yes. It might not be the yes of your imagining, but it's a yes of some sort, because like God's answer to you is yes. Might not be the yes of your imagining, but it's a yes of some sort, even as we contend with our limitations, so yeah.
But it doesn't sound like you have a scripted game plan of, all right, here's what I'm going to ask, here's this, and then if they say, I mean, people can smell that a mile away, but a lot of us that grew up in that culture of, sort of the
apologetics,
90s apologetic youth group culture, we had the script, you have the 4 spiritual laws, you have the roadmap to Romans Road, all these things that you would ask a person. I mean, and you see it online. You see like Ray Comfort and these guys going around asking these college kids on campuses, have you ever had a bad thought? Well, look in your Bible. It says if you did, then you're a sinner. You're going to hell. And then lead them to their version of the sinner's prayer or whatever. But it sounds to me like, and what I saw in this isn't just a quick little manual about a how-to thing. This is going to take you deeper into the why behind the what. Yeah. And into the reasons behind what we do. So I don't know. I think this is a cool little book, and it's not something that you're going to have to devote your summer to. You can read this pretty quickly. So this is Emmaus Road Publishing, so people can pick it up there.
Exactly.
And do you have a website or anything that you want to direct people to?
No, probably not. Well, I
think you're probably the only person I've interviewed that has ever said that.
I mean, it's like the internet's the internet, so folks can kind of as they see fit. But yeah.
All right, I got a couple more questions for you. If you're cool. Okay. So first one, completely unrelated to this. What in the world do you think is going on with all these people wanting to join the church? Because I don't know if you're seeing it, but like in our diocese, we've got a ton of people joining it. And everywhere I travel, I'm hearing from bishops, I'm hearing from priests, I'm hearing from my friends. There's this, relative explosion of what it seems like. Are you experiencing that? And what do you think about that?
So I think like one sociological consideration is that the last generation didn't baptize this generation. So there was a lot more in the way of unchurched, just entirely unchurched masses. So everything for them is new. And so I think that what we're experiencing is a bit of that novelty. Like I think the rates of disaffiliation are slowing and the rates of affiliation are quickening. And so I think that the kind of fallout of secularization is bottoming out. So I think that what you're seeing is the natural law it asserts a kind of gravitational force. And as you push away from it, that gravitational force is felt more keenly. And I think that what we're seeing now
it's kind of a pullback.
A pullback. So I think that people can address or people can acknowledge that what we saw kind of transpire in the culture more broadly from between like 2010 to like 2022, whatever, just kind of like make up ballpark dates was insane. And people got caught up in that. And I think a lot of people are coming to the recognition that it was insane. But I also think that there's been some serious damage done to our culture as a result. It's kind of been gutted. So like the families basically failed, and then like the polity has basically failed, and then like the church in many settings has basically failed. And people are recognizing that the ordinary means to which they would ordinarily advert for meaning and purpose are just not available to them in the same way in which they might have been. And so they realize that their unbuffered lives are just totally exposed to the depredations of an increasingly terrible state.
I wish I could put that on a T-shirt. That's I mean, I don't know if it fit, but that sounds really cool.
Yeah. So it's then the question is like, where do I root myself? Or like, how do I commune? Or how do I get in touch with things that actually matter? Because it's so evident to me that the life cycle is entertainment, distraction, addiction, and I'm headed for addiction. Left to my own devices, I'm headed for addiction. So people realize that they need to lay hold of something, or they're going to be laid hold of by whatever it is, like sexual addiction, drug addiction, internet addiction, etc. And so I think that a lot of folks now, the internet has totally democratized. So charismatics and apologetics, to make up the former word, the latter word already exists. And so like the proclamation that we're seeing on the internet and the type of formation that we're seeing on the internet is widely available, even to people in the sticks. The need for community remains, but at least those first steps towards faith are much easier in the post-COVID dispensation. And then the need for it, especially with the rise of like mental health problems, the rise of just kind of general deracination, is far more acute in my estimation. And so I think like people are dying for it and they can't find it elsewhere and they're getting it in the Lord. But I think that what's required at this stage of the game is an ongoing rooting in a community and forming in a tradition such that they're not easily storm-tossed and wind-swept by whatever changes transpire in the coming years and months, or months and years. Because like I think there's a real risk that this is just a fad. unless we take these people in. And I think the churches need to be ready to take these people in, even though they're going to come in really weird arrangements. You're going to have like a guy tatted out to the nines, coming up arm in arm with a gal who's got this like sweet undercut and blue hair, and they're going to be interested in Jesus. And the question is, are we willing? Are we ready to talk to them about Jesus? And I think that like this is in part why the virtue signaling or like tribalism can be really discomforting, because it's like at the end of the day, you just got to care about Jesus, and you got to care about the ways in which to introduce other people to Jesus. So,
well, you said something in there that made me think about why Catholicism seems to be experiences. And I don't. Truth is, I don't know about like Protestantism. I feel like the mainline denominations are just
they're toast. Yeah, there are some evangelicals, I think, like whether Baptists or non-denoms, who are still gaining like a significant number of converts, and then like Orthodoxy to a certain extent, not as much in the West, but it's basically Catholicism and evangelicals.
Well, I think too, it's like that desire for the firm foundation of something traditional that is bigger than just the opinion of people at that moment.
Yep.
So I think this generation is seeing the need for something bigger than themselves, and something that is rooted because there's been so much radical change that has happened.
Yep.
And when they look at these ancient traditions, like Orthodoxy or Catholicism, they see this, what used to be the worst word in the world, which is an institution. They see that and they go, okay, I like that.
Yep.
So I don't know. I think it's wild, but I'm interested, and these would be the last couple questions, but what would you say to the person who is considering Catholicism? They haven't decided they wanted to do it, but they're Catholic curious. They're opening to it. What do you think the most important thing for that person to do or to know is?
Yeah, I think, so I find those conversations kind of easy to have, because I find that people are more open to it now than they might have been like 10 years ago. Yeah. They're less offended by it now than they might have been offended by it 10 years ago. Something that I ask people is just like, do you think you're going to die a Catholic? And that, I think it's good to talk about death, because I think it's good to situate our lives in terms of their limits. And my experience is that a lot of people think they are.
Yeah.
It's just a question of whether now or later. And then if later, why not now? What are the obstacles that remain? It's like we're not going to be able to rationalistically work our way through all of them in the course of this conversation. But like, are you willing to lay in before the Lord? And then the thing that I recommend most often is Eucharistic adoration. Just spend time with him. Like you get comfortable in the man's presence and the God-man's presence. And you find that like a lot of your speculative difficulties get kind of worked out in practical proximity. It's just like, not in the sense that like you feel it, but like it at some, you believe it, you hope it, you love it. And so, I think you're right. That like the Catholic Church has a doctrinal tradition of a robust sort, that the Catholic Church has a liturgical life of just an incomparably rich sort. And when people see that she's got principles, she's got arguments, the Holy Church, that she's got liturgy, that she's got a rootedness, but also a transcendence, which gets us beyond, like highest science in contemporary world is just politics. Everyone's just into politics of one sort or another, whether it's more social or political or whatever. But like when people see that there's something beyond that can actually situate that, it changes their lives. It totally changes their lives. Because then you're not just in this spin cycle of election cycles. It's like that your life isn't just success or defeat depending upon who sits in a particular seat and whether this state or this country or whatever else. It's like, it's beyond that. So I think to facilitate those conversations, I think the best thing we can do is ask good questions and listen for good answers, because I think a lot of people have good answers to furnish, but they might need help in, formulating them.
What would you say to the person who has said, okay, I'm converting, maybe they're in their first year? Yep. That's a lot of my audience. There's people who are like new Catholics or are just recently getting fired up about their faith. What would you say to them? Yeah,
I'd say most important thing is to pray every day, and I'd say 20 minutes is a good little number. If that's something that represents a challenge for you, it's worth working towards. If you're already doing that, I'm not discouraging you from doing more. Next thing would be sacraments. A lot of people have in their minds, okay, Sundays, holy days, great. Beyond that, I'm not sure that I want to go to Mass every day. And so they don't go to Mass any day but Sunday for fear of becoming like a Jesus freak. I'd say that there are intermediate stages.
Yeah.
So it's like make your liturgical life something that you can celebrate with those whom you love. Like, what are the feast days of your kids? Go to Mass with them.
Love that.
All right? Yeah. Or like, what are the big solemnities? What's like the big solemnity of your diocese? Go to Mass on that day. Like, try to find ways in which to enrich your Catholic life so that it's not just the thing that you do on the off day. So that's not just like part of the workaday world, that it has a kind of distinct shape. Next thing would be, so introduce some penance into your life. If you're going to grow, you got to stay hungry. If you're going to get hungry, you have to deprive yourself of certain goods, certain comforts of a lower sort, so as to create space for certain goods of a higher sort.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you're a slave to caffeine, know that, and ask the Lord to curtail that. Maybe you have 6 cups of coffee a day. For Lent, go down to 3. You're going to have a killer headache for the first 2 days, but you're also going to find that you got space in your life. Or if every time you get sad, you eat food, you're like, it's not a big deal, I haven't gained weight. Well, it can be a big deal insofar as you're bringing your sadness to the kitchen before you bring your sadness to the chapel. And at the end of the day, like, the Lord wants that. He wants you. And whenever you bring your sadness, you bring yourself. Next thing would be study the faith. Doesn't have to be like another class in which you enroll each semester. But I'd say challenge yourself with something a little beyond you for 15, 20 minutes a week. So it's like, if we're always reading things that we comprehend 100%, it's not clear that we're growing. I think that we got to get used to a little bit of incomprehension. Even though we feel ever so slightly judged by stuff that we don't understand, there's got to be room for that. And then the next thing would be, really invest in Christian community. I think that's where our Christian life takes shape, and that's where we get rooted, that's where we get involved, and that's where it becomes harder for us to wander off, to drift off, to leave. If I had a 6th point, I'd say serve the material poor. Find ways by which to serve the material poor.
We just wrote a talk.
Let's go.
I mean, that was awesome. Yeah. Well, Father Pine, thank you so much for sharing that. And, folks, check this book out if you're interested in what we're talking about. Of course, he's everywhere. You can find him in lots of different places, even though he didn't want to pump a website, which I think is cool. Just Google him if you're interested. And once again, thank you for taking time to be here. Yeah. I know you're a busy man. You're on your way somewhere else, as am I. But the Lord provided. Thanks to John Bishop for letting us crash in his house, and for Miriam for producing the show today. Friends, thanks so much for watching this episode, and I look forward to being back here with you next time. Thank you, take care, and God bless. Thank you, Father Pine. Thanks for listening to Catholic Feedback with Keith Nestor. Catholic Feedback is brought to you by Stewardship, a mission of faith, and our generous supporters on Locals, Patreon, and donations through our website. Catholic Feedback is a production of Down to Earth Ministries. For more information or to bring me to your parish or event, visit downtoearthministry.org. That's down, the number 2, earthministry.org. See you next time.